Hi, in this video we're going to have a look at how we can set up and configure Git as part of Android Studio. We're going to be using Git as the version management system. It's probably the most widely one used nowadays, and it will give us the ability to collaborate across a team. Where each person will have their own repository where they can add things to it, you can check it out, you can revert back, undo previous changes, and whenever you're happy with what you've done, you can then push that up and share it with the rest of the team, and in turn they can bring down your changes and integrate it into your project. So it gives us lots of benefits. It gives us a way to, for example, to track and to see how a project's evolving. It gives us a way to share material. It gives us a way to revert back to previous ones, to have different branches of it and bring it together. Really is very capable overall. Probably for this project, most of what we'll be doing will be rather routine. We'll have one central project. Each person will be adding their elements to it, pushing that up to the source, and then people can be able to draw those things down. I'm going to split it into two different videos. The first video, we're going to look at how do we configure and set things up for this, and to have that initial project added in to be managed by Git and to push up that initial, if you like, version. And then also for the other people to be able to connect to this and to pull it down. In the second video, we'll then look at, once it's all been set up, what are the day-to-day activities in terms of whenever you log in, about checking about changes, about making your changes, about being able to share those, about dealing with merge conflicts and other things that can happen if two people have ended up working on the same piece of code and there's conflicts in terms of what each person has independently done. But as mentioned, first video, this is simply going to be configuration, it's going to be set up. So ideally, this should be a do once. So context we have here is I'm going to have two users. User one, and this is going to be the person who is going to seed this initial project. So there we have just a copy of Gauge. It's not managed by anything, it's just an ordinary standalone project. We're going to have a second one, a user 2, in the minute their folder is empty. So I want to simulate them being able to pull down from the GitLab is the particular server we're going to use, their own copy of the shared project. So for a team of 5, we'll have one person who notionally is our user 1 who will be sharing it, and then we're going to have a total of 4 other people who will all bring down their own copy of the shared project. And at that point, we've got it set up and people will be able to proceed on. So a few things we need to do first of all. So in terms of the tools and technology and things that we're going to be using here, a lot of it's built into Android Studio, but there's just a few other things that we need to do. In terms of the actual Git site itself, this is a good one to go to, so git-sem.com. Within this here, I would suggest that you download the actual Git client itself, and for Windows or Mac OS, whatever you want to do. When you do download that, you'll find that, here I'm using obviously Windows, when you right click, you'll be able to bring up, for example, a Git GUI or Git Bash. The Git GUI we will use in this particular one. So you want to install that. It'll be in the lab machines by default, but if you're setting this up in your own laptop, do download it, do make sure you install it. As mentioned, you can right click and then just to check to see if you get a Git GUI, and that should give you this window that appears. Now you can do a lot of things from this in terms of creating or cloning or managing your repositories. We're only going to really use this here for creating an SSH key. The rest of the stuff we'll do through Android Studio itself. Okay, so we'll assume we have that particular version done. Few things we want to do then is we will be within the school using the GitLab server. So if you go to EECS self-serve, you'll find that there's a link within that where you can click through onto the GitLab. Now I'm already basically logged into this, got myself set up. You'll need to do the same, and you'll find there's instructions for how to do that through the self-serve But as part of this then, we're going to be using GitLab as the central source then for sharing and for managing all of these different aspects. And whenever you're put into your teams, we'll be setting you up a project that will be shared with the members of that team. And it's through that project then that you will be collaborating and sharing your code. I'm going to show you the steps today for setting up your own project and for sharing that, which can be useful if you want to work on a parallel process. But it'll all sort of roughly tie together. Now, the reason we're doing this, first of all, by way of setup, is that you'll have noticed for logging into GitLab, you've got to type in your credentials and log into the service. And whenever we are inside Android Studio and introducing code, we don't want to have to type in passwords and things like that every single time. So we're going to set this up with private public key, so SSH encryption, so that you will be able to automatically authenticate with it and to push up your code to it or to pull things down. So this is basically automatic login. It gives you a good amount of security as well. So what we want to do in this here is whenever you've logged into GitLab, if you go to your account, and you'll find this up in the top corner, you can go to the profile settings. And inside profile settings, along the options at the top, you'll find a section in SSH keys. So if you click on that, now these are all of the keys that you have added in. You can have multiple keys for multiple projects. Now, I've temporarily removed all of mine from GitLab, so it'll look similar to this one here. So there are no keys at the minute whenever you do this. Now, for creating a key, which is basically your password, so to speak, if you go into the Git GUI, you can go down to Show SSH Key. Now, there won't be any keys found the first time you do this. Again, I've deleted my local ones, but the first time you do it, it should be empty. And you can then ask to generate a key. So if we click on this, you'll have another sort of icon. You can enter a passphrase as you want to, but just I'm going to ignore that. So click on OK twice, and you will then have the key appearing. So this will appear. Now here's the thing. The text that you can see on the screen and probably see quite clearly, that effectively is like your password. So I'm going to delete this after I finish doing this video. If you didn't delete it and you actually were to share with somebody the full key here, then effectively you're just giving away your password. People can see it, they can log in effectively as you, and they can do everything that you could do. So the key that you have, you want to keep that private, because that is your private key. There'll be a public bit then that'll be matched against it. So we're going to do copy to clipboard in this case. And you'll need to do this in the lab machines to set it up for you. It'll be stored in your own student profile. If you're setting it up on your laptop, again, you'll have to do the same process in that, and you'll have your own key then for working off your laptop. So copy to clipboard, and we go across then to the GitLab server, and I can paste that in. And then I'm going to give it my temp key. I'm going to add this key in. So at this point, I've now set up GitLab with this key called my temp key. And it means then that in any other device, I can connect to my server, pass in that temp key, and it's going to recognize that it's me. It's going to let me then to automatically add or remove things from my repository without logging in separately. So that's going to simplify the whole process of connecting to the repository. Okay, so everybody will want to do this. All team members will want to do this in terms of setting up their version of GitLab. So we can then quit out of GitGo, we don't need it anymore. The rest of the stuff we're going to do through Android Studio. So let's run Android Studio at this point. Now I've opened this up with user 1 and Gauge. So it is user 1's copy of Gauge. They've got the particular project. So I mean, it's just the standard one, so we can run it. And we can see that it's not going to do anything. It'll basically just be the normal one that we have. So this is our starting point, what we want to add up. So we'll be doing this here through Android Studio. Now, a few things by way of setup. Inside Android Studio, you can go to Files, you can go to Settings. Down in Settings, there'll be a section on version control. If you expand that, you'll see a section on Git. And inside this here is looking to be pointed to wherever you have installed the Git tools. So you can do test, and it says yes, it's able to find git.exe. So particularly if you're setting things up in your own laptop and you've installed Android Studio first before doing Git, double check that Android Studio is set up so it knows where you find your main git.exe. That means then that when we're using the different commands, it's able to actually call Git. If you haven't defined that, it's not going to be able to do it. So do get that set up. The rest of the stuff should be more or less okay. You don't need to do much about that. Okay. Now, that's most of the setup. So we've configured GitLab to have our key. We've created it through the Git GUI. We've checked inside Android Studio that we have access to git.exe. So now we're in a point where we can take our first project. One member of the team can do this, and to push this up and to share it then with the rest of the team members. So the steps we're going to do for this one here. Now, if we're doing this here, we need to create a project to share it with. Because you'll be working in teams, we will be sharing we will create a project for you and then share with the team members. Now, if you want it, each team wanted to have it as own second project, so I can click here on New Project. You'll be able to do the same. You can give it, I'm going to call it Gauge for the example of this, and here the project name. And you can stick with the rest of the stuff if you want to. You can give it a description. Going to keep it a private project, so it'll be private to the particular team. And I'm then going to create the project at that point. So whenever we do this, we have our project successfully created. We've got our SSH key, and this is going to be important. We're going to be coming back to that particular one. Now, if one member of the team was doing this and you wanted to share it, you can look at members on this. So I can go into members and I can search for different people. I can find myself. I can pick another student ID. I could add them in as a developer on it, which means that whenever they log into the GitLab, they will see this project. It'll be on part of their account. It'll be shared. There'll be a developer on it. So that gives them the rights for it. So don't want to do that. If you did want to set this up, you can do that for your other team members as well. But I'm quite content just having this project as is. So as a reminder, because you're working in teams, we will set up a project for you, official one for the module, and share it with you. But if you want to set up your own additional projects, you can do it. Just follow this particular process. Now, the goal that we have is that we want to, the first user wants to take their local project, what is not stored within Git at the minute, and ultimately push it up onto GitLab so the rest of the team can get access to that. And there's a few steps we need to go through for doing this. And this ties into, I suppose, how Git actually operates. Effectively within Git, you've got a sort of a local repository, which will be in your machine. And you can use that then for committing things to it, tracking changes, reverting back if you want to. Whenever you're happy with your changes, you then push it up onto the shared repository. And that's the one then that other people can pull it down from to their own local Git repositories. So the steps we go through for this, there's a few of them here. Now inside Android Studio, under VCS or version control, you'll find that there's an option for enable version control integration. So this one says we want to take our project, which at the minute is just an ordinary project, nobody's managing it, and we want to put it under version control. So if I click on this, it asks me for what type of version control do I want to use. And we could go for CVS, SVN. In this case, Git's the one we want to use. So I do OK at this particular point, and that's it. So it's now notionally added. You'll get a message down at the bottom that create a Git repository in user1 Gauge, so inside that particular folder. So nothing magical has happened at this point. Now, here's the thing for this one here. Whenever we create it, we haven't added any files into it yet. So it's just an empty repository. And if you hadn't noticed before, normally your file names would have been black. Now we've got a lot of file names that have turned to sort of a browny color. And these are files that are now recognized as being part of the project, but they're not part of the repository. They haven't been added into it. So we want to add these things. We basically want to add our projects to the repository. There's a couple of objects or options that we have here. We could go through each individual file. I could right click on it and I go down to Git and I could say add that file in. And that would add that particular file to the repository. So I can choose which things I want to add. Now, if you have a lot of things, that's going to be a bit hassly. And it's true, anytime you add something new, you're going to have to then add the thing in to make sure that it's managed. Because I'm starting off in a fairly large amount of files here, what I'm simply going to do is go to Project View. There's my folder, so there's all of the files in the folder. I'm just going to be crude. I'm going to go down to Git, and I'm going to say Add. Now, this will add in all of those files to the repository. In fact, if I just add in the entire directory, and you can see then, we'll just go back to our Android view, we now have things in green. So green means that we have it, it's been changed or modified in some way, it needs to be then committed. So this is, if you like, a change that we've made to what's stored in the repository. So we want to commit these things out. So that's what we'll do then for the next one. Now, just as a little aside to this, so if I were to go to user 1, inside my gauge folder, you'll notice that there's I added the whole folder. So we got our hidden Git folder there. We've got build folder that's going to have a bunch of generated files, including, for example, here, a 32 meg jar file. Now, I don't want to push up all of those temporary files, the intermediate ones or the build files to the repository. So we need to have some way of being able to exclude those. And inside Android Studio, anytime you create a project, you automatically have a git ignore file being created along with it. And the git ignore file is a list of the things that should not be added into the repository. So Android Studio sets this up for you. So inside here, any IML files or anything in the Gradle folder or anything in the build directory, none of those things will be added, which is good, so I don't need to worry about adding in binary or files that are going to be generated. The rest of the things, though, they will be added in. So that's a useful aspect of Android Studio. It automatically gives you an ignore file. Sometimes it's not ideal. Sometimes you still will be sharing the odd project file. When you pull it down, you're going to have to deal with. But it's fairly good at only sharing the things that it needs to share. So we have this set up. What I want to do now at this point is I want to go back into the version control, and I want to commit my changes. So this basically says I've made some changes, I then want to add them to my local repository. Or in this case, I've just added a whole bunch of new files, I want to add those to the local repository. So I do, and we'll pick up on the workflows in terms of making changes and sharing and pushing and pulling those changes in the next video. So I do commit changes at this point. So this is me saying I want to add all of those new files, this is my initial commit, into the repository. And it's given me a list of all of the files that I'm adding. So we've got the PNG files inside my image assets. I've got my source files. I've got some stuff down here in terms of the icons, a bunch of XML files in terms of configuration stuff, and there's some stuff in that we don't necessarily really need to share, but nonetheless they weren't part of the ignore list, so we will share, and so on. So it's used the ignore list to cut out anything that it doesn't want to, and is leaving me then with this list of initial files. So I'm going to say initial commit of gauge added in. Now before I hit commit down here, just to pick up, there's a number of things or actions you can trigger in terms of reformatting the code, doing a code analysis, or checking any to-dos. So these are good, sensible things. You can leave them in if you want to. I'm taking them out here because I just want to sort of show you pushing this thing up. So now I do commit. And if you want to add the following to Vit, I'm going to say no to this one. You may get these occasional ones because sometimes the ignore file is not precise. So 91 files committed. So initial commit of gauge. So these are committed locally. They exist in the project directory on the local machine. They're not yet up on GitLab. And you can see then that we're back to the normal black coloring on the file name. So it means that it's a file, it's part of the repository matches the local file, there's been no changes to it. So far, so good. Having done this, so we've got it set up in the local repository, it's stored there, and we're happy that we've sort of committed it locally. The next step is I want to push it up to GitLab. I want to push it up onto the server so that I'm taking my local copy that I'm happy with and I'm sharing this then with the rest of the team. So that's the next phase. And I know this may sound complicated in terms of multiple steps, and there are multiple steps, but it is a useful arrangement. In the next video, we'll look at the workflows and you'll see why that's a useful arrangement. So nearly there. I go into version control, I'm going down to Git, and I'm going to go down to push. And actually when we were committing, we actually had an option of commit and push, so I could have committed it locally and pushed it up if I wanted to. But you'll see in the workflow that in terms of local commits, we want to make sure we're happy we have something that's fully working and running before we push it up. So I'm going to push this up now. So if I click on this, it says, right, I'm pushing from my local master to the remote location, but I haven't got a remote location. So I want to link this local copy of Gauge into the GitLab version of it. So anytime I push my changes on my own machine, I'll be pushing them up to GitLab. So I've got an option here, I can click on Define Remote, which I'm going to do. And it then says, okay, well, where do you want to push it to? Now this is where we go back to GitLab. So inside GitLab, if I go to the project I created, I can go to the SSX section and I can copy that. And I'm then going to paste that in as the URL. So this says, take my local copy, push it up to the GitLab server. In particular, push it up to the project I created. And because we're using the SSH authentication, it's not going to ask me for, well, it'll check the key and it should be fine in terms of being able to get access to it. So I do OK here. Creating a new, so confirming the server key, so it's a new one. Do I want to add it? So yes, I do. We're happy with the authentication. It's then saying it's going to take all of these files and push them up. So again, that's all the ones I've added. So I do want to push them up. And push successful, push master to new branch. And if we then were going to our online version, this is the one here, to our project for this one here, we can see that there's been one commit. And inside the repository, we can see all of the files that have been committed. So I've got my app, I've got my source. Again, all of the files are there. So at this point, I've taken my local copy and I've then pushed it up onto the GitLab server. Brilliant. So from the first user's point of view who've been sharing their project, their job's done. They have added it, they've checked that it's fine, and they pushed the thing up. The next step that we want to do then is really going on to our user 2. So user 2 is somebody who wants to check out this particular version. And now they actually have a more simple version, a straightforward process. So they want to go into Android Studio. I'm just going to close this down. So imagine that they are into Android Studio for they open it up for the first time. And we're going to check out a project from version control. So in particular, I'm going to check out from Git. And it's then asked me, okay, what is the repository URL? Now, again, this is where they will, when they log into their own version of GitLab, they'll see the shared project. They will go to the SSH key, they'll copy that and paste that one in. Parent directory, now this is where they are going to check it out to. So I'm going to check it out to user 2. And then the directory name, the folder name. Now, user 1, they called their project Gauge. If I wanted to, and user 2, I could pick something different. I'm going to strongly recommend you don't. It makes much more sense to stick with the same project name and not to have different users checking it out under different project names. It's just going to confuse the matter. So there, stick with the same project name. So the team members are going to have to just to confirm what they're going to call the thing. So at this point, I'm going to clone it, which means that I'm taking a copy of all of the files that's up in GitLab and copying them down onto my own machine. So inside user 2, we now have a Gauge folder, which contains all of the things that we've checked out. So Android Studio says, okay, we've done a clone. Do I want to open it? I'm going to say yes, please. And we open the thing up. Now, you might get this depending on which version of Android Studio you're using. So can't load 2 modules. This is just because the ignore list wasn't ideal. Just going to remove selected. It's not important. So this is user 2. He or she has then opened it up, and they effectively have their own local copy that has been taken out. So they have their own local repository because we opened it up from Git. They too are connected to the shared version on GitLab. So at this particular point, we have 2 users, both with their own local copies. So for example, we have user 2 has Gauge and user 1 has Gauge. These are 2 separate projects, both of them managed by Git. So user 1 and user 2 can work on them independently. They can make changes, they can share them to their local version. And whenever they are happy with the changes they want to share with the rest of the team, they can push them up then to GitLab. And all of the other team members can then check against GitLab. Have there been any new changes? They can pull them down, integrate them in with what they're doing, and work collaboratively. So it's been a bit of a long setup, but we've got through to the end. It's going to be important that all of the team members go through this process. We'll follow on now to the second video. In the second video, we'll assume that everybody's done this. So we'll then look at the workflows in terms of whenever you start things up, checking to see if there's changes. Whenever you make changes, how do you actually share those? And if there are any merge conflicts, how do you actually deal with those aspects? But pick that up in the next video.